Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Europe is at a crossroads after Trump's White House published its new national security strategy. European leaders are pointing out inconsistencies and even crying foul over some of the assumptions in the document, which points the finger at Europe and not Russia. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines.
The Ukrainian cannot answer that with mass. They need to answer that aggression with quality.
Troops from Ukraine train in Germany to fight on the front lines.
Mr. President, this is your prize. This is your peace prize. There is also...
Donald Trump awarded his and FIFA's first peace prize. And Israel's participation in Eurovision sparks boycott. The White House's new national security strategy sent shockwaves across the Atlantic and through the old continent. Packed with phrases like civilizational erasure and calls to correct Europe's trajectory, has turned a simmering transatlantic rift into official U.S. policy. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
Everywhere you want to go.
While Donald Trump is busy putting medals over his own neck.
Excellent.
You won't be seeing any European leaders handing him awards anytime soon. That's especially evident after the White House released the latest U.S. national security strategy, a document outlining the country's security priorities. Its pages are riddled with harsh criticism of the old continent. Phrases like civilizational erasure or the need to correct current trajectory, laying out Trump's contempt for Europe in black and white. It didn't take long for some European officials to snap back.
An interesting metric of erasure is the number of gun deaths, about 6,700 a year in the EU and about 47,000 in the US.
We don't believe anyone needs to give us advice on these matters. They are regulated by our constitutional order.
Dear American friends, Europe is your closest ally, not your problem. And we have common enemies. At least, that's how it has been in the last 80 years. We need to stick to this. This is the only reasonable strategy of our common security, unless something has changed.
But others quickly moved to damage control.
Of course, there's a lot of criticism, but I think some of it is also true. If you look at Europe, it has been underestimating its own power towards Russia, for example. I mean, we should be more self-confident.
The transatlantic partnership is unique and, as always, allies are stronger together. When it comes to decisions relating to the European Union, they are taken by the European Union, for the European Union.
And yet the rift between the United States and Europe, previously expressed only in spoken words,
the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values,
now seems larger and more official.
Donald Trump has driven a wedge, and a permanent wedge, if you ask me, between European and U.S. security.
U.S. wants to basically play a much smaller role in NATO, and that is a huge problem.
The document makes no mention of NATO Article 5. An attack against one is an attack against all. Instead, it says the United States will prevent NATO expansion, one of many nods to Russia in the report.
NATO has enlarged because of the the wish of the people who wanted to join it. That was the story of, our country, Poland, but also many others. And to suddenly start talking about expanding, this is basically adopting Russian propaganda, which is really strange.
It's wording such as this that's casting doubt on Donald Trump's commitment to other NATO allies, especially when it comes to the presence of U.S. troops in Europe.
He is transactional. He only believes in how much money he can get out of Europe, and that is not the basis for a long-term security relationship.
For TVP World, Kazimierz Wysiak.
Ukraine once again faced a barrage of drone and missile attacks, pummeling the country's energy grid even harder and pushing it to the limit as winter sets in. Now let's go live to our correspondent in Ukraine, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So what can you tell us about these attacks? Just how bad have they affected the energy grid?
Well, this was a massive attack, with the Ukrainian government reporting Russia launched 653 drones and 53 missiles into Ukrainian territory. That's 36 cruise missiles and 17 ballistic missiles. Now, this was a widespread attack targeting 8 different regions of Ukraine. So again, the Ukrainian government saying targeting energy infrastructure, which has already taken a battering over the last couple of months. But that looks set to intensify as these bitter winter temperatures start to hit. It's still not quite freezing here in Kyiv, but other parts of Ukraine are much colder now, and these parts of Ukraine are being really impacted by these strikes, with Zelensky saying the Russian goal is to hurt millions of Ukrainians, and they have already fallen so low that they launched missiles at peaceful cities on St. Nicholas Day. So that's the Ukrainian government's perspective on these massive attacks over the last 24 hours.
Certainly. Now, we still hear from the United States that there's progress has been made in the peace talks with the Ukrainian delegation. What else can you tell us on that front?
Well, we're hearing from the US side, that was these talks between Witkoff and Kushner, the special envoy, and the Ukrainian delegation featuring Rustem Umerov. Now we hear that these, from the American side, that these talks were constructive. Zelensky, for his part, is heading to London for further talks with Keir Starmer. We still have very little detail about what these talks are really entailing, what kind of agreements they're coming to. So we're still waiting to hear more, basically. What we do know is that the EU, still trying to get these frozen assets sent to Ukraine, have continued to find stumbling blocks. The Belgian government doesn't want to do it single-handedly. They want to do it as a joint EU measure, but doing it as a joint EU measure hits roadblocks with Hungary. So look, a difficult position diplomatically for Ukraine to be in. But Zelensky's hoping that this diplomatic push, including these talks in London tomorrow, are going to help matters. But we are yet to see what those details will be from the US side, from the Ukrainian side. So watch this space, basically. As soon as we hear more, then I'll be right here on TVP World, Don.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv there. Try and stay warm and do stay safe. Thanks, Oz. In what looks like a wasteland in wartime Europe is in fact a training ground where Ukrainian troops are being prepared for frontline combat in eastern Ukraine. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins takes us inside the multinational mission in Germany, where Europe's instructors are sharpening soldiers' skills as the fight against Russia's full-scale invasion rages on.
This may look like war, but it's not. It's a trench warfare exercise in Germany, aiming to better prepare Ukrainian troops for battle. The European Union Military Assistance Mission was set up in 2022 in response to Russia's full-scale invasion. 75,000 Ukrainians have gone through it so far. Several European armed forces take part in the €360 million programme, training recruits across the bloc.
We will never know how many lives we have saved by bringing the quality of the Ukrainian forces to a high level, because that's what we're focused on, the quality of the training. Where the Russians, their quality is the mass. The Ukrainian cannot answer that with mass. They need to answer that aggression with quality.
Germany, the Czech Republic and Poland are key players. The Bundeswehr has provided up to 1,000 trainers and translators, educating Ukrainian infantry medics and drone operators on how to snake through trenches to firing Rheinmetall machine guns.
So right here we have the machine gun 3, MG3, originally from World War II, and it's in use in the Bundeswehr since the 1950s. The weapon that we have right here is a reassembly for the Bundeswehr. But we also know that in Ukraine, the Ukrainian troops fight with these, so that's why we also train them on the machine gun 3.
Beyond teaching, European trainers know they have a lot to learn from Ukrainian soldiers who have been on the front lines for years. One Ukrainian medic on the course has saved up to 35 lives. He says the enemy is no longer on the ground, but in the air.
We all must understand the rifles, machine guns and other weapons are useless on real war because all people use drones, FPV drones. One FPV drone costs $200 and one rifle costs $1,000. But one FPV drone kills 2, 5, 6 people at once.
The European Union says it stands shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. And since Russia launched its invasion of the country to the north, EU countries have backed that up, sending nearly €200 billion in financial, military and humanitarian aid. This military training facility in Germany is arguably the EU's most hands-on contribution, but the question swirling among politicians is whether changing the mandate to allow the education to occur on Ukrainian soil instead of European soil could lead to a just and lasting peace for the war-torn country. But for the soldiers that I've spoken to here, they state that their focus is much simpler and sharper. It's straight onto the front lines, defending their country from Russian aggression. Such as this maritime studies professor turned soldier, hardened by battle.
I finish this war only when we win. Not stop the fight, not stop the shooting, only when we win. After this I can go home to my family.
The mission has been extended until late 2026. The biggest question now is, will it adapt to modern and deadly new warfare, and if European troops will head to the war-torn nation to train soldiers closer to the front. Angela Skujins for TVP World.
They say sports and politics don't mix, but at the World Cup final draw in Washington, they collided in full view. FIFA awarded Donald Trump its first ever Peace Prize, turning football's biggest night into a showcase of geopolitics. Natalia Komarov brings us more in her report.
Please welcome the very first winner of the FIFA Peace Prize.
The 2026 World Cup final draw in Washington, D.C. proved a great night for U.S. President Donald Trump.
Mr. President, this is your prize, this is your Peace Prize. There is also a beautiful medal for you that you can
FIFA
wear.
President Gianni Infantino presented the Peace Prize, newly established by the Football Association in November, to, quote, recognize exceptional actions for peace and unity.
Well, thank you very much. This is truly one of the great honors of my life. And beyond awards, Johnny and I were discussing this, we saved millions and millions of lives.
Earlier this year, Trump repeatedly made it clear he hoped to receive the slightly more prestigious Nobel Peace Prize.
I stopped wars from happening. If it were somebody else, they would have gotten 5 Nobel Prizes. I never even got a mention, and I wouldn't.
In October, the Norwegian Nobel Committee decided to recognize the leader of Venezuelan opposition, Maria Corina Machado, who then publicly dedicated her award to the American president.
I dedicate this prize to the suffering of people of Venezuela and to President Trump for his decisive support to our cause.
This comes as tensions between Trump and Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro are at an all-time high.
Excellent.
The prize Donald Trump did get, the FIFA Peace Prize, some call a consolation prize tailored precisely for the American president. Still, he seemed happy to have his efforts toward world peace recognized at a star-studded gala. But the main event of the FIFA final draw was, unsurprisingly, the draw itself. Football fans around the world finally found out who their teams will be facing in next year's World Cup, hosted jointly by the US, Canada and Mexico. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
This is shocking. United States of America!
An identity crisis for the mega song contest Eurovision, as Ireland, Spain, Slovenia, and the Netherlands say that they're boycotting next year's event. It comes after Israel was given the green light to take part in the competition, despite calls by several host broadcasters for the country to be excluded over the war in Gaza. Gabriela Fresnak explains.
For decades, Eurovision has been a symbol of European unity. Originally an experiment to test live transnational television, it has since become a beloved tradition, bringing together music fans from Europe and beyond. But now Eurovision's message of unity is all but gone, after 4 participants announced they would boycott the contest.
Slovenia will not participate. We will still talk about the transmission, of course, if they exclude Israel, but they will probably not allow it.
Spain has decided to withdraw from Eurovision. Spain doesn't forget. We don't forget the tragedy and the massacres suffered by the Palestinian people, and we hope that justice will be made someday and that those responsible will pay for it. As I've understood it, Ireland, Spain, Iceland, and Slovenia won't be joining. We still have a few countries hesitating. At least that's what I sense from their speeches.
Ireland, Spain, Slovenia and the Netherlands pulled out of the contest after Israel was given the all-clear to compete in its 2026 edition, despite calls from several participating broadcasters for its exclusion over the war in Gaza.
Whilst no one can be failed to be moved and appalled by events in the Middle East, again, there is an acceptance that it is not governments and their decisions that take part in Eurovision. It is their public service broadcasters.
The public opinion is divided, with some agreeing that there is no place for politics in Eurovision, and others expressing their support for the boycott.
By allowing Israel to perform at Eurovision, they, EBU, is legitimizing the regime in Israel and the genocide they are carrying out.
Yes, I understand the decision, but I think they should just let the Dutch contestants join, because politics is one thing and music is another.
I think in a way that's a very small sacrifice to make, considering the atrocities that have been carried out in Palestine and in Gaza, particularly over the last 3 years.
Several countries, including Belgium and Germany, have already declared their participation, while others are yet to decide. One thing is clear: the upcoming 2026 European Song Contest appears anything but unifying. For TVP World, Gabriela Fresnak.
2 weeks before a pivotal EU summit, Ursula von der Leyen unveiled plans to raise tens of billions of euros for Ukraine's war effort. The options? Borrow on international markets or issue a loan backed by frozen Russian assets, both facing fierce resistance from member states. In a double whammy, Donald Trump's new national security strategy signals a major shakeup to America's role in European security and relations with Russia. Now joining me to discuss is Tom Keating, Director of the Center for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening.
Now, let's start with the national security strategy. In it, we read that the first priority for the United States and Europe is reestablishing conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia. We often hear that the United States wants to reestablish good economic ties with Russia. How much is that relationship worth, and is it worth sacrificing the relationship with Europe?
Well, the first thing I should say is we should not be surprised by this national security strategy from the United States. Since February, when J.D. Vance spoke at the Munich Security Conference, we've known precisely what the US administration thinks. And so really all we see here is, in black and white on paper, an articulation of that. And fundamentally, Donald Trump has a problem with the European Union. He doesn't have a problem with European countries per se. He has a problem with the European Union because it presents a united bloc. And that is something which he has a problem with. And so he is obviously arguing that political parties, opposition parties in Europe that oppose the European Union should be supported to bring back stability, greatness, I think the document calls it, to Europe.
Well, isn't it a paradox that Europe is doing everything that the U.S. or Donald Trump has been asking? It's increasing its defense expenditure to 5% of GDP. Meanwhile, Donald Trump supports far-right parties in Europe who would never spend so much on defense, especially to counter Russia.
Well, if you think that Donald Trump is logical in the way he operates and in what he says, then I mean that's a fundamental fallacy that we should have got over many months ago. I mean, the bottom line is that if you look at the kind of the economic elements of this national security strategy, you will see that Donald Trump wants any barrier to the United States access to markets being cleared away. Just look at the fuss in the last 24, 48 hours over the fine that the European Commission has levied on X for breaching European law on transparency. You would have thought from the fuss that senior people such as Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and others are making, you would have thought that the European Union had shut down Twitter, had stopped it from operating, which is the case, by the way, in Russia. But no, all it's done is said, this is the law in Europe, you haven't followed it, you are therefore fined. So the contradictions come thick and fast, but the bottom line is that none of this is a surprise. And it's time, frankly, that the European Union and the leaders in Brussels and across member states woke up to the reality of Donald Trump and stopped wishing that he were different.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk tweeted that, or he posted on X, that Europe is your closest ally, not your problem. Is there a way for Europe to reliably count on the United States now, or is it essentially an end to NATO as we know it? What about the Central and Eastern Europe, Poland, for instance?
Yeah, so let's remember, I mean, Donald Trump will be president for another 3 years. So what the European Union should be doing, in my view, and I think people like Donald Tusk are right to send the kind of positive, friendly messages that he's sending. But I think also people like Donald Tusk are right to say, look, Europe, you've got to wake up. Don't sit there and assume that the United States is the same kind of ally as it has been for the last 80 years. It might change. It might change back that way in 3-4 years' time with a new president. But right now, the threat is from Russia. The threat is also from being undermined by the United States. And as I say, don't wish that things change for the better. Build up your defense capability, stand on your own 2 feet, and assume that the United States is not going to be the reliable ally that it's always been.
Should the European Union, should European NATO members be in a state of emergency right now to build up these capabilities? And I mean, Washington is, pushing for Europe to take on its own defense responsibilities by 2027.
Well, I mean, as a citizen of a European country, I would want my country to take its defense seriously. So, of course, I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that the only time that Article 5 of NATO, the mutual defense element of the NATO treaty, has ever been invoked was by the United States in the context of the 9/11 attacks. So, Europe has supported America in its hour of need. I'm sure the Americans would support Europe in its hour of need, but the bottom line is we cannot rely on that. And so, we're quite right to move fast, to strengthen our defenses, to strengthen our defense spending, and assume that if the worst happens, the United States might be leading from behind, as they say.
Well, there's been also talk of the EU. Well, the EU collectively holds over $2.3 billion in U.S. bonds, and there's been an idea of selling those bonds if the United States throws Ukraine or Europe under the bus in these negotiations. What do you think the likelihood of that actually happening is, and what would that do to the transatlantic relationship?
I don't know whose idea that is, but they obviously don't understand anything about the capital markets or the bond markets. It would frankly be a petty thing to do. What the EU should do is move forward on what it has within its capability. So yes, defense spending, but also, I mean, a really good example here is the fact that we are still talking many years after Russia's central bank assets were immobilized, mainly at Euroclear, the bank in Belgium. We're still talking about what to do with those assets. And there's a very real possibility, as we saw in the the 28-point peace plan that the Americans proposed recently jointly with Russia, there's a very real possibility that Donald Trump will do some deal with the Russians that mean those assets get taken away from European control, or at least we get put in a position where the Europeans have to agree with the assets to move away from European control. So that's a really good example of how dithering and delaying means that Europe will find itself dancing to the tune of Donald Trump rather than setting its own agenda and being responsible for its own destiny. I mean, Europe is an enormous economy, a huge population, a global trading powerhouse, yet it finds itself subservient to the United States.
The EU is looking for at least 90 billion euros to keep Kyiv afloat for the next 2 years, allowing it to negotiate from a position of strength with Russia. Friday's meeting between the European Commission President and the German Chancellor and the Belgian Prime Minister brought no breakthrough. What needs to be done to assure Belgium that it won't be on the hook if it releases the frozen Russian assets?
Well, there was a great headline in Politico on Friday saying that Bart de Wever was a useful Russian asset, and I think, frankly, that is the case. I mean, it's downright disgraceful that Belgium continues to block supporting the Ukrainians with those assets. Obviously, Belgium has some legitimate concerns. I think the European Union member states are trying their best to deal with those concerns. But fundamentally, each European state has to play its part in supporting Ukraine. Poland plays its part by having taken in huge numbers of refugees, being a huge military staging post. That's a significant drain on the Polish economy, I'm quite sure. So it's time Belgium stood up and recognized that the right thing to do is to unlock those assets for the benefit of Ukraine, to accept the sorts of guarantees and support that other EU member states are willing to offer, and recognize that the chances of the kind of legal case that Bart de Wever is talking about is so unlikely that, frankly, the probability is very low, and therefore the risk that he worries about is almost certainly not going to come to pass.
Okay, so what happens if the EU can't overcome this obstacle?
If the EU can't overcome the obstacle, then it proves Donald Trump right. It proves Donald Trump that it is unable to operate for the good of its citizens. It's unable to bring forward European greatness, as the US national security strategy has to say. And at the end of the day, European Union taxpayers will continue to foot the bill for supporting Ukraine. There is free money lying on the table in Brussels at Euroclear. And if that money isn't used, I don't think the European Union is going to say, well, sorry, Ukraine, we won't support you. It will simply have to call on its own funds, which means that citizens across the European Union will find that they are paying for the support of Ukraine, continuing to pay for the support of Ukraine. So, it's a double whammy. Those assets should be used. It would show that Europe is strong and united, demonstrate to Donald Trump and to the Kremlin that Europe is united, and provide Ukraine with the absolutely critical funding it needs for its defense and the continued functioning of its economy.
Would that look like somewhat of a coalition of the willing in terms of finance for Ukraine? And when would Ukraine run out of money?
Well, I think Ukraine will run out of money extremely soon, in just a few months. I mean, this is critical. There are financial facilities, the Ukraine facility of the European Union, for example, that continue to support Ukraine. But ultimately, to have a whole load of money lying in an enormous pile in Belgium and not use it is frankly criminal. And if I were a European Union taxpayer, I'd be extremely cross with the Belgians for essentially inflicting the costs of the war in Ukraine on the European citizens, rather than inflicting the cost of the war in Ukraine on Russia, which is the aggressor and the perpetrator of this tragic conflict.
Yes, Tom Keating, Director at the Center of Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful evening and hope to see you next time. Goodbye.